I would like to open the floor for discussion and questions. Who would like to start? Yes, please.
It's on? Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Arthur Slupinski. I'm an architect from VELUX, Denmark. And first of all, thank you for a very insight-giving presentation. I find it very sort of interesting with the harmonization of speaking about daylight, and also with the architects communicating the requirements to the architects so they become part of their design method instead of something that's at a later point is being documented by some engineer where the design is almost done. And if we sit in this room here, I mean, this is a very nicely lit room. I can easily read a book here in spite of not having too much glazing area, because glazing area does not necessarily equals good daylighting. And the harmonization, I mean, you have so many different terrains, different types of buildings, different types of windows, but one thing that is harmonious is the sky, you could say. So daylight comes basically in these areas where we have the sky view. So if you can see the sky, meaning you get the daylight in the spot. And in order to integrate daylight into a building design early on, it should be easy, not just in the building design, but actually in the design method. So it should be easy to comprehend. I mean, for an architecture student, starting to talk about the 250 lux while sketching at a building is not really easy or attractive either. But if we started talking about sky view and designing for sky view, then basically it could be easy for an architecture student to simply draw the no skylines in a section drawing and have the idea, okay, 80% of my room has actually sky view. So how come nobody is talking about this sky view to floor area ratio? That was actually my question.
Yes. All right. I would like to...
Does anybody want to take that, or should I? Yeah, I deal a lot with architects, practitioner myself, and it always works best when there is that initial engagement in the design. And I do think you've hit the nail on the head that the no skyline is actually a really good first indicator. There's also a little bit about the 10% window area, which is also kind of a good indicator, but those are a little restricted. I think there's an assumption implicit in the European standard that simulation starts to take a role. Just to what degree that simulation happens with architects and what degree that happens with specialists. I have a commercial interest that it happens with the specialists, but I do think that it's probably to everybody's advantage as it happens in the offices. We have seen in Sweden the daylight factor in the last 10 years has now become standard in the mid-sized to large offices, but there's still a little bit of resistance to the climate-based. But it's up to us to within basic education of colleagues today at a university trying to teach just what we're talking about, and hopefully they go forward, and because ultimately simulation tools will bring us to the next level, but we also have to establish, and maybe that's, we're missing the point a little bit, and not, in Renate, I think you've really hit a good spot there with being able to give these basic things to start the discussions. Because as you say, by the time it reaches the specialist, then there's so many other factors that are, and we see that our ability as specialists to affect a building is often quite limited because quite often the facade is already approved in the permit, so the ability to change it is low, and at the end we end up dealing with interior materials, and that's not really optimal daylight design. So I think you're right. We have to have the two levels going there if we're going to be successful. But we haven't necessarily been got the ball rolling, I think, in either of the two levels, either the practitioners doing climate-based daylight simulation or melanopic lux, and we haven't really engaged the sort of rules of thumb yet as well. So does anybody want to add anything?
Let's move on to the next question. So, Jan? Yeah.
Hello, Jan Wienold. I'm actually also part of the standardization group and a CIE representative of it. It's actually more a comment, and I think you know what will come. It's more a statement. We have a lot of discussion in the group about these levels, and we have a common understanding that the current levels are too ambitious to reach. But we have another common understanding how low we should lower them. And I really warn that if we are now in a period of time where the daylight design is, and this is acknowledged by many people, is not really in practice, which means we have not really daylit building. And if we take as a criterion, we have 80% of the building is not fulfilling the standard, that's why we have to lower it. Then we manifest, if we lower then the thresholds, then we manifest this bad design into a standard. And then if you look back in future, in history, they say, this was the period of bad daily design, yeah? And the people made a standard even for this. And I don't want to be, or I want to fight that this is not the case. So the standard, in my opinion, has to be honest. So if a building is good in daylight or just has a minimum level in there, and we have a lot of experts there, then it should fulfill the standard. But a bad building should be never passing the thresholds. Yeah? And this is where we have to work on to have this common understanding. It cannot be that the final criterion is, okay, we need to put 50% of the buildings that are currently built, that we put the thresholds there that they pass. So this is what
well, maybe first, yeah?
Should I try to,
yes. You want to
comment that?
Perfect, go.
Because, Jan, that is, of course, a discussion that we have had in the committee. And I think it's about finding a balance where we, of course, not go too low, just to say that we comply with 50%. But we also want the standard to be implemented into the legislation. And if we set the ambition level too high, it will not go into the legislation, and that's actually what we are seeing. The places where the standard has been implemented is often with a modification that actually does not meet the standard. So we need to find the right balance, because I think if we get it into the legislation, we will actually, no matter what, promote better daylight design.
Any more comments from the panel?
Yeah, maybe just to comment, because I really believe in what you are talking, and the standards must be translated also in other contexts, in other specificity. We don't, I believe it's not possible to have one standard. We need to adapt the standards to make them more implemented in the codes and in the mandatory documents. That's, yeah. Mm-hmm. So the adaptations.
Okay. Yeah, there was also possibly a comment related to this? Or?
No, to following Jan's.
Yes.
My name is Heinz Hackel from VELUX in Austria. Again, about the requirements. I think there is the option, many buildings, to fulfill their requirements. Single-family houses, office houses standing alone. So if we adapt the standard, that would be my intention, maybe in dense urban areas, in the lower stories, yes. But in the top story, why reducing the requirement? Just to fulfill or to make it easier? And I totally agree what you said, Jan. If we match the poor conditions of the building codes and say, oh, we got it, we have 99%, that's not the result. And look back at thermal comfort. There are people coming along with amazing requirements. We all said, oh, they're crazy, these passive house guys, and so on. But what happened? The standard increased. Maybe not to 100%, but it made it possible to increase. So I think in general we should stick to the standard because we all believe it's right. We just have to reduce it in situations where it's not possible. That's my intention.
Can I?
Yes,
I want
sure.
to. We completely agree. I think, especially I speak for my own point of view and presentation. That's actually the approach that I'm trying to push on. Quality is something, and quality is already there. Anything that should be below, in my opinion, is more like a political choice, not to say that this is quality anyway, and we lower the level, but we just acknowledge that those things exist. And it's a little bit like the very interesting speech that we had this morning about ventilation, ASHRAE, going from quality to just acceptable, now back to quality. And if you have seen the table there, it was about quality and cases in which, there might be, these are the targets of qualities and cases in which we should adapt or we should accept. And I think this is the way to go. So make very clear what quality is, and we know it already, acknowledging also that outside there is something else, so that people would eventually start to use the standard. Because as it is now, my feeling is that, it's something that is out there, a good reference document, but nobody is going to use it. And that's quite frustrating, I would say, especially for us.
And we have the case with a lot of historic buildings that are very far from meeting the standard, or especially in existing property rights, where maybe somebody didn't meet the standard to start with. And it would be very nice then within the courts, because the courts love standards, to be able to have something we can use. So if it's 300 lux that goes and somebody's got 150 lux in their existing, it's really hard for us to apply that standard as a means of discussion. So something that is more adaptable to, a lot of older buildings have very thick walls and you're limited in what you can do. So I think, but I agree with you completely. We can't lower it and you don't open the door to your house and let everybody in. You still want to be selective and try to push it forward. But the question is, and I know you hate this analogy, but I always talk about the horse, right? We want the horse to go forward, and we put the carrot. Where do we put that carrot? If we put it a kilometer down the road, then the horse doesn't move forward. So just where is that carrot going to be? And both statements are true. What Jan is saying is true. And then maybe a move to adapt it in particular for multifamily residential. It's one of the few times when I've been in a situation where there's perhaps a viewpoint that opposes mine directly, but I respect it and really understand where it's coming from, and at certain times I can tilt in that direction as well. But it's like most complex problems, the solution is what is eventually going to go down on paper, and maybe we can't solve it in a debate. Maybe we can solve it in the standard itself. But it's not easy, and it's a complex problem. We've talked a lot about it.
Yeah. All right. Question? Yes.
Okay. This is on. I first just want to compliment putting this panel discussion together, going from a sweep of global approaches and down to very specifics of can we meet it in our session, and it was wonderful. Especially on Claudia's presentation, but I think relative to all of you, is I'm curious about the time factor of when things get adopted. And from my point of view, daylight factor has been around for 80 years or 100 years, where spatial daylight autonomy has existed for 10. And so one would expect that there's a much slower adoption or lower adoption rate for newer things. So there's a progression as people get used to things. There's also a progression of aspirational standards like LEED versus minimum standards that are trying to push the bottom end. So in the United States, we've used what we call an adoption curve with early adopters who will go for the most aggressive things and get some reward for it, some recognition, versus the laggards who have to be pushed. So that puts a time scale on all of these decisions. Are you in the early adopter phase or are you in the laggard phase? And furthermore, what are the really big problems you want to address, right? If some building types like multifamily are very difficult to do, maybe that takes longer to bring into the market. Or maybe you just ignore them for a while until the professions can get further up to speed. So you're not in the situation of setting standards that are too low or difficult to change later on. Anyway, so to that point, Cláudia, do you have any perspective on kind of this time frame from all of your data collection, or how different countries are trying to deal with that progression?
Lisa, thanks for the question, but it's very difficult to answer to this. In this collection, every time that I collect one more document, more doubts I have. And I think that the word is flexibility. We need to be flexible. We have different countries, different curves of learning, different practices. And this is very important to consider. I believe that we need to also think about the design stages. This is something that, for example, in an initial sketch, we can use a more flexible or more geometrical approach just to give an idea. At the end of the design, we need more precise metrics. So this is also complex to understand this situation. But I believe that taking into account that we can have a common standard in some years, and from this standard, we can do adaptations, as, for example, Renate proposed, local adaptations, translating also some of the metrics, as Paul mentioned, in a more accessible language for architects. That's also important, because when we talk about daylight factor or even more dynamic metrics is still worse. It's very difficult for a practitioner to understand this and to translate this into the design. So I believe this is quite complicated. I believe that if we have a common standard, very flexible one, we can maybe try to adapt for each reality. But I don't believe that is maybe... Oh, I don't see this standard yet. I believe that we need to think in something that give us a kind of a menu of metrics or a menu of possibilities to be used in different typologies, different contexts, and so on. Mm-hmm. But I cannot give you a time frame. Sorry.
Well, very quick comment. So I think this not only relates to metrics, but also to thresholds, like the talk did this morning, from like acceptable thresholds to actually healthy thresholds. Yeah. We do have a question also from online. Federico Caprilli, do you think AI can speed this harmonization and lead us to a unified design process? And if yes, how? Does anyone want to comment on the use of AI in this harmonization process?
I don't agree, because I think the AI will produce more problems, because AI goes in the past and take a look what happened in the past. And then in the last decades, we have a lot of buildings with low daylight quality. And so when you learn from the past, and there are only buildings with low daylight quality, I don't know what can the AI learn. This is my opinion. Sorry.
All right. So we have, another question, please.
Hi, I'm David Geisler-Moroder from the University of Innsbruck. Thanks a lot for all your presentations, and I'm really happy to see that I'm a simulation enthusiast and doing daylighting simulations a lot. But what do you, a little bit coming back to what also Lisa mentioned, what does it need to bring it out there, and what do we need? Happy that Niko is part of that, with being part of the Enlighted initiative. What do we need that people understand? What does it mean, 300 lux at some point? What Björn showed, there is no daylighting courses in architecture school there. What do we need to do? What should be initiatives that we bring it out there? I know that from my own experience and working for a consultancy company as well, things happen there and people sit there and they include a window not once but twice and have 50% transmission not once but twice. And how do they know that what they simulate is correct or not? In the end, they make a tick, okay, I managed 300 lux, but is that correct or not? And going back to the rules of thumb, double the window height that is what I can reach. I need to understand that to get some feeling of what can I do with the simulations. And only then I can look into the standards, into the numbers, what do they bring to me. So what should we take, or what should we try to do as initiatives to bring people to that point? A little bit complicated question.
I think we have to communicate in totally different ways. My opinion is that we have lost a lot of architects in daylighting because of the simulation. And I agree totally, it's complicated to understand daylighting with all the numbers and factors, and I don't know. But when you realized what happened with a room without daylight or with small windows and so on, you have to make the experience. And with the architect, you have to communicate about pictures and photos and so on. And with some people from the real estate community, you have to call, okay, when you have more daylight, you have a higher price for your building. And you have to communicate totally different. And when you have technicians and so on, then you can discuss about simulation and so on. So you have, when you have different target persons, you have to communicate differently.
We do something in Enlighted, it's called Beyond the Metrics, where we say metrics are about compliance, code compliance, but we use sections, we look at patterning of light, and this is where the architects engage with us. In a section, it's not hard to do, and it really tells the story. And as you get to working with it, different buildings, maybe you have different point in time section. You learn to sort of hunt out where's the interesting things. And it's at that level that the architects engage. During the downturn with housing, there wasn't as many building permits going out, so I was going out to the architects and half-empty chairs and stuff. But it gave us an opportunity to present some of this way of working. And we could always tell towards the end of the presentation when we started showing these sections and how we're working, everybody gets very awake and engaged. But I don't expect anybody to get excited about a spatial daylight autonomy. That's sort of melting it all down into a soup. Do you want to eat soup every day? No. There's more to the cuisine and point in time and daylight patterning and different ways to look at the problem, different tools. I think that's how we should be engaging architects.
So I would say one very last question, because there's other activities that also.
So I just want to add something. When we saw in Austria really an hype of how to work with daylight with architects, it was the time when we had the VELUX Sunlight House opened. It's up to me, it's really the good example you could look at, and then you can feel what the numbers mean. And this is really important, and maybe one short story which shows how difficult it is. We had these test families in the Sunlight House. When they moved in from their former flat, they said, there's no difference, it's the same. It was never the same. And they recognized that it is not the same when they had to move back to their homes, the former home. And then you gave them one more roof window. But it's really difficult to recognize what the quality is. It is not from worse to better. You don't feel it. It's reverse from better to worse. Then you say, oh, what's going wrong? And that's really hard to show and to experience. But up to me, it is the good example, and the example that shows what does the example make you feel like and what does the number say in comparison.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, very last question.
Okay, that's following up of the first question with Arthur. Well, the North Skyline, that would be really interesting to see a study with spatial daylight factor 300 light compared to the North. Because one aspect we have had it in the building requirement, and it does influence city developers. Some of them making sure that one building is approved before the neighbor is built, others. So this indirect impact that however, thank you for a good presentation. However, the requirements are when they go into the building code also influence the city that have not been, I mean, we build city as if nobody thinks. It's just, and you could do it so much more efficient in terms of daylight, heat, ventilation, and there's no encouragement. So that's an aspect of it indirectly, but maybe one of the most important aspects for sustainable future.
Mm-hmm. I think that's does anyone want to reply? I think that's a nice concluding comment.